Hello, let's set up our indexer cluster. So to start with, we'll need to set up the cluster manager first, and then do the indexers and join them to the cluster. There is a few different ways on configuring the cluster manager and configuring the indexer, so you can do it from the GUI, from the config files, or using the CLI command. I like to do it from the config files just to keep it clean. You can do it any of the other ways that you'd like. So I'll put the documentation in the description so you can take a look at it. But here's the example for the manager node. So the cluster manager. And there's some options here. So there is the ability to do it from the, I don't know if that is the correct one. There is this option, which is configuring it in the server.conf, which is what we're going to do. There's a CLI method, and I think it's this. Oh, no, it was this. And then here's the option for configuring it from the GUI. So let me move this over here. So here's our cluster manager. Again, this is like a management node, is serving multiple purposes. I'm going to go to the settings dropdown, go to indexer clustering. You'll need to enable indexer clustering, and then it's going to ask you what you want it to do, or the type of node this is going to be. This is going to be a manager node, so I'm going to click next. Search and rep factor. So here is where kind of you have to do the math in a real environment. For here in this lab, I just have 3 indexers, and I'm just gonna pick the rep factor of 3, search factor of 2. All that really means is that when there is a bucket of data, it's going to replicate that bucket 3 times, and then it's going to make 2 of those buckets searchable. So the third one is just a copy, but it's not actually searchable. Only one of those buckets will actually be used, but for searching by the search head. But the other, that second bucket, is there and ready in case one of the indexers goes down. You still have a searchable copy that can be searched. And then in here, you want the security key and cluster label, and you click enable manager node, and that's how you do it from the GUI. But to do it from the backend, I'm going to use Config Explorer, but you can go straight to your file system if you want. You can put this in an app by itself, but I'm just going to put it in system local, and we're going to come over to the server.conf since this is where we want that config, and I'm just copying over this config from the documentation over and then changing it. So here, the manager node, this is that first option in the wizard. We want it to be a manager node. Replication factor, this can only go up to the amount of indexers you have. So we have 3 indexers. I'm just going to put it at 3. You can put it at 2 if you want, or whatever fits your needs. I don't need all 3 to be searchable. I'll just put it at 2 so we can lose 1 indexer and still maintain full searchability of our cluster. And then you want a pass4 SIM key. I'm going to call that Fairly Chilly to match the theme, and I'll call it BC cluster for the cluster label. That's it for this. I'll click save, and if you want to double check your configs for any syntax issues, it's not as big of a deal with Config Explorer since you have syntax highlighting and it's easy to know when you make a mistake. But if you have Config Explorer, or if you want to do the btool command from the backend, in the CLI, it's just op Splunk bin Splunk space btool space check. In Config Explorer, you just come to this tab and then click btool check, and it'll check for any issues. It didn't find any issues this time, so we're good to go. Sometimes you'll find just random errors with like apps you have installed that you can just ignore. We're just making sure that this didn't have any issues. So for this to take effect, I'm going to do a full restart. So I'm going to go to system or settings, server controls, click restart, and I'll be right back once this is done restarting. All right. So that's done restarting. I'm going to log in, and we're going to go over to indexer clustering, and we can now see that it is enabled and it's using that config that we had in the back end. If we go to more settings, we can see the search and rep factor here. And again, I don't like editing these things on the front end. It's just personal preference. I like to do it from the back end. You can do it from the front end if you'd like. So the indexer, the cluster manager is ready. We need to now set up the indexers. It's going to be the same deal with the indexers. There's an option to do it from the CLI, do it from the GUI, and doing it from the configs directly. I'm going to do it from the configs directly. And here is the doc for that one. So this is what the quote unquote peer node looks like. So indexers have a few different names, so you'll hear them called just nodes or peers or indexers. All of them kind of refer to the same thing. It just depends on, or search peers. It all just depends on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about a search peer, you're talking about the search head kind of using the indexer to pull data. It's all just referencing the same thing. So we need to set up the peer now. To set up the indexers, you could push out the config. Don't use a deployment server. You don't want to connect the indexers to a deployment server. That's how you start causing issues with the cluster. If you have something like MOBA Xterm where you can send the same command to all of them at the same time, might be easy to do that, but I'll leave that up to your imagination. I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way. Here's indexer 1. Indexer 2, indexer 3, and I'm gonna start with making the config here on indexer 1, and I just realized that I don't have config explorer on these. So no worries, we have MOBA Xterm. So I'm gonna do exactly what I just mentioned earlier. I'm gonna open up all three of these. So I have MOBA open on all of them. I'll go to the multi-exec mode so I can type in the same command in all. And I'm gonna escalate to root and then switch to the Splunk user. Cool. So now, let me clear this out, make it a little bigger. Oh, never mind, because I can't make it bigger. I'll make this one bigger so it's easier to see. So let's go to op Splunk etc. We'll go to SC system local. I'll put it in system local since this is not something that's going to be changed all that often. We want to vim the server.conf since this is where it's going to live. I'm just going to hold the down arrow and get to the end of the file. Cool. Again, this is what I'm referencing. So I'm just going to copy this. I'll put it into just Notepad. Oof, that's so bright. Replication port, you can just choose anything that's open. This is what it's going to use to replicate the buckets between each other. The clustering tab is the main tab or stanza that we need to keep in mind. For the manager node, we need the name of the cluster manager. So that's, for me, it's just cm dot barely chili. Also, I'm not that bad at typing. I just can't see my keyboard with this mic in the way. So it's going to be HTTPS since it's the management port and hostname colon 8089. That's the management port. Mode peer, again, that just means it's an indexer that's part of a cluster. And for pass4 SIM key, this is going to be the same pass4 SIM key that we entered in the server.com for the cluster manager. So pass4 SIM key, barely chili. I'm going to copy this, come over here, click multi-paste so I can paste it into all of them. So replication port, clustering, all that stuff looks good. I'll do escape, colon, WQ to write and quit. And then I'm going to do a btool check just to be double, triple sure there's no syntax issues. So op Splunk bin Splunk btool check, enter, no issues. If I want to run that btool check again, after I make any other config, from here on out, I can just do Control R and then do check, and it'll pull up the last command that has the word check in it and just click enter to run it. So that's good. And I'm going to do Control R and look for restart for the Splunk restart. And I'll be right back once this restart is complete. All right, so that's done. It looks like indexer 3 had an issue. We may need to check on that, but let's see. So 1 is up, 2 is up, 3 up. Yes, I guess it just timed out. Not wanting to log in. There we go. So all three of them are up. I think if we go to indexer clustering, we should see that it's a peer. So peer here. You don't need to check this on all of them, but I'll just show you here. So peer here and peer here. I don't know if we did the licensing yet. We have not, so we need to do the licensing next. So it's still on a trial license with a low indexing cap. So the indexers are connected. Now, if we go back to the cluster manager and we're in the same spot, we're in indexer clustering, we can see that each indexer is in here. We can see the buckets that it contains. These are just like the internal logs that are in there right now. We can see some stats about it, that it's fully searchable. And if we go to indexes, we can see the search and rep factor. So we can see that this one's not all the way done yet, but the search and rep factor is met. If it's working on anything, like it's working on like a fix-up task, if you click this bucket status button, it'll show you like a fix-up task that it's on, or it has excess buckets or whatever. You can see all that stuff here. So the search and rep factor is good now. We can see everything. We can see the peers. The next thing that we need to do is make sure that we do the licensing piece. So you can do some of this from the front end, but you'll still want to do some of this from the back end when you need to push out the bundles and so on. So let me get my notes ready and I'll be right back. All right. So I'll probably save the backend commands for a later time because I just think it's easier to do it from Config Explorer. But I think there might be a couple commands that I don't think is possible to do from the front end. But I'll leave that for a different video. This time I'll just show you how to get this working from the front end to push out configs. So the config that we want to push out is for the licensing, since it's on a trial license at the moment. Oh, a rolling restart, that might be what it can't do from the GUI. We'll take a look at that. So we need to push out the config to get the indexer connected to the license manager, which just happens to be the same host as the cluster manager. So I'll open up Config Explorer. You can do it from your file system. I'm going to go to manager apps. So master apps is a deprecated directory. Manager apps is what we need to use to push out configs over. So blue, push out configs over to the indexer cluster. So in here, I'm just going to mimic what I already have in this BC license directory. So I'm going to open up a couple of these. I'm going to open up these two files because I'm just going to copy what's already in there. So if you're on in the CLI, you could just copy the whole directory into manager apps. So you can use this underscore cluster app because that gets pushed out to the indexer cluster. I'm just going to make a new one called BC underscore license. And I'll make the local, go in there, make the app.conf, and just put something in here so that's considered an app. Call it license manager. I think I called it something else in the other one. Now we'll need the server.conf, which is where the actual license config lives. So I'm going to close that, open up the server.conf, paste it in. That's good to go. And in the metadata directory, I'm going to make that. We're going to create a local.meta. I think for most of these configs that go to the indexer, you don't really need the metadata file for permissions, but I just get into the habit of doing that. So there we go. So we have the app.conf to make it into an app. We have the server.conf, and we have the metadata directory with the permissions in there. So that's pretty much it. There is a method to do the btool check on the indexer or the manager apps directory, but I don't think you can do it from the config explorer. You might need to do it from, yeah, you have to do it from the CLI. So that's one thing you would want to do from the CLI. But when we do the bundle push, it's already going to do a check for us. So we're going to go, since the app is already in Manager Apps, you don't need to make a server class or anything. We're just going to go over to Settings, go to Indexer Clustering, go to the Edit dropdown, and go to Configuration Bundle Actions. And then we're going to do the checks in here. So anything in that Manager Apps directory is going to get bundled together and pushed out to the indexer. So if there's anything you don't want to push out, don't put it in that directory. Couple things to note here is it tells you the last time it was updated. It tells you what the current bundle that's active is. It tells you what the last bundle that's active is, and or the latest bundle that was checked, and then the previous one. Once we click, we'll click validate and check a restart. So that's going to send that bundle over to the indexer cluster and ask it to just make sure that the config is good and that the check if it needs to do a restart. Something I've noticed, sometimes it'll say that it doesn't need a restart, which I think it's this that tells you that it doesn't need a restart. But I've noticed that occasionally, even if it says it doesn't need a restart, it'll still do a restart. So just be ready for that. But now that the bundle has gone through, it's successful. If it's not successful, go back, check your configs. There's probably something wrong. And if all of them validated it successfully, here's the hash for the bundle that we just checked. So now we're going to click push, and it's going to restart all of our peers. If you want to do a rolling restart where it kind of restarts one and then goes to the next one, I don't think it gives you that option to do it from the GUI, so you may need to look up the CLI command to do a rolling restart. So I'm going to click push. Again, it's telling me that it may need to restart. So for the license changes, it does need to do a restart, I believe. So we're going to do that. Yep, there we go. So the status is restarting. And I think it is doing a rolling restart. Yes. Okay. So never mind. I guess it does it can do a rolling restart from the GUI. I typically do this stuff from the back end just because it's a little faster to just hit Control R and validate, or Control R to search for whatever command that you're on than it is to go through and manually click on everything. But you do visually get to see what's happening in the GUI without having to run like a watch command or something like that. So we'll give this a second to finish up. We have one more peer left. All right, it's on the last one now. All right, there we go. So the bundle has been pushed, and the active bundle is the one that we currently pushed out. We can see the previous bundle's ID. And if for some reason you need to roll this change back, you can always click the roll back button and it'll push out. It'll use the previous bundle. But if we go back now, you can see that some data isn't searchable yet and the replication factor hasn't been met. Since our cluster is really small, this is going to finish up super quick. So there's still some stuff that needs to be replicated. So if we go to fix up tasks, we can see what's going on. So search factor, there's no fix up tasks. For replication, there is, and it's saying that there's not enough targets, and it'll tell you what it's trying to do. So it says it can't replicate because the bucket hasn't rolled. And buckets in Splunk, when Splunk restarts, it'll roll a new hot bucket, or it'll roll hot buckets into Worm. And when there is a fix-up task like this, where it's like waiting for the bucket to be rolled before it can replicate, you can always do this action drop down and force it to roll. So in case you ever need to do that, but we'll leave that for another time. So that's pretty much it. That is how you push out configurations to the indexers. So now if we just go to here real quick, we can go double check, go to settings, we can go to licensing, And there we go. So it's connected to our license manager, and it's also connected to our cluster manager. Both are the same host, but they're connected to it, and this host is acting as both the cluster manager and the license manager. So really moving forward, we don't need to access the indexers anymore from the GUI unless you really need to troubleshoot something from the GUI for some reason. And kind of best practice, or just the standard, is to just disable the web GUI on the indexers in the cluster. So you can push out a bundle to disable the web GUI. And it just prevents people from just accidentally going in there and making some config changes, because you want to make sure your indexers are all within sync and they're identical to each other configuration wise. So you really don't want anyone going in there and poking around. So I do recommend disabling the web GUI, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to leave this the web GUI up in case I need to show something in an upcoming video. So yeah, that's it. We learned how to configure the cluster manager and add indexers to the cluster and get it connected to the license manager by pushing out a bundle. So I think we're set up pretty good for the next video.